In Lochdubh, everyone knows who their people were, until a stranger opens the wrong book. For one wet Highland weekend, the kirk has filled with old photographs, christenings, faded certificates as their print pages, family Bibles budging on the price of a loaf are suddenly prepared agree with absolute greed was just found ye, your grandfathers did in 1891. Absolute certainty on what? Great-grandfather. Into this comes Marcus Vale, a famous television gene buried truths and an even greater gift for announcing them where everyone can hear. Hamish Macbeth would rather be anywhere else. So would several of the people Marcus intends to investigate. Chapter 1. The names on the wall. By 9 on Saturday morning, Lochdubh Kirk contained 4 centuries of family connection, and one argument about whether a woman named Euphemia Sutherland had been born in 1862, or merely baptised. Then, Yun! The argument was being conducted beneath a handwritten notice that said, "Please do not touch the exhibits." Mrs. Wellington was touching 3 of them. "No, no," she said, moving a sepia photograph half an inch to the left. "I cannot go beside the Macrae tree. People think my grandmother was a Macrae. She married one. Menzies. That is not the same thing." Fiona took a breath through her nose. She was a slim woman in her late 50s, dressed in a dark green skirt. And then tengi marriage records, baptismal registers marriage, namash, and ministers. Mammoth. Letters from ministers, old subscriptions minutes, and several documents whose importance increased sharply whenever anyone suggested throwing them out. Normally, Fiona possessed the patience of a woman accustomed to deciphering 19th Nanti Caymantain. The genealogy weekend was testing. "Your grandmother's photograph is beside the Macrae tree." She said, "because your grandma is mentioned." Mrs. Wellington gave the look of one who had discovered a serious flaw in archival practice. That is how my soundings begin. At the other end of the meeting room, Hamish Macbeth prevented enough disorder, and decided he had already against the wall. He had been asked to attend by the minister, who had used the phrase, "just keep an eye on things," of a man transferring responsibility. There was Hamish thought. Very little eye on people, Jamie, and brought a fair. Every table seemed to support another domestic relic. There were war medals, mourning cards, school prizes, a silver christening incumps, 2 knitted shawls, and a silver wooden porridge stair whose owner had a card claiming it, survived a card claiming had saved the clearances. No explanation was offered as to how the porridge stirrer had managed this. On the vestry wall, sheets 200 years. Some spread handsomely across 200 years. Others stopped abruptly beside notes, or, in one case, simply not spoken of. Abadi. Hamish preferred the last. It was lugs had settled beneath the longest display table, where the floor was warm from a nearby pipe, assessed and whether food was involved, and returned to sleep. I opened. Alec Brodie came through the kirk door carrying a cardboard document tube under one arm and an expression suggesting that someone had already got history wrong. He was nearly 70, narrow-shouldered, white-haired. A lifetime spent over registers had altered him physically. He wore a brown tweed jacket polished at the elbows and had a habit of tapping 2 fingers against his lower lip before correcting anyone. Yeremy. Fiona. Alec! You've put the 1841 census map after the 1851 household transcription. Yes. It should be before. It is on the opposite wall. That is not before. Fiona closed her eyes briefly. Hamish said, Alec. Alec glanced at him. Macbeth. Your people were from West Side originally, so I've been told. Though there's a question over the 1873. Aye. Alec tapped his lip. The bride's mother. Hamish straightened. What about her? Nothing proven. Then we'll maybe leave the poor woman in peace. Alec looked disappointed. He uncertainty in Pacon Shrilly. Work existed. Near the door 2 women were hanging a length of tartan ribbon between notice boards. Nessie Curry said, "They say the television man can tell where you came from just by looking at your face." Jessie Cossery considered this. He would need a very good light. They say he found an earl in a family in Dundee. An earl! Or a duke. That is higher. I know. Hamish moved they could discover royalty among one another. He was examining an old photograph of 6 fishermen. Outside door opened again, and Elspeth Grant walked in with rain bright on the shoulders of her coat. Hamish became interested in the fisherman. He had not seen her for several months. That fact had been perfectly convenient until the moment she appeared. Elspeth paused from her dark hair and looked around with the alert expressions of someone entering a room in which everybody possessed a story, and several of them would regret telling it. And she carried a notebook rather than an umbrella. Hamish. Elspeth. You sound surprised. I'm no surprised. You're staring. Hamish glanced at the photograph. I was looking at the boat. There isn't a boat. He examined it again. No. Elspeth smiled. That was when Mrs. Wellington, standing 10 feet away, stopped arguing with Fiona. Nessie Curry stopped tying ribbon. Jessie Curry followed her gaze. Hamish felt, possessed by people who lived in small villages, that a Freshers exhibition had just opened. The certainty. Elspeth looked toward the family trees. I'm doing a feature on the weekend. For the paper. For a Sunday magazine. Meeting real village genealogy. Might be entertaining. It will be. You don't sound hopeful. I've already had to stop Mrs. Wellington from moving her grandmother 3 times. Where was she trying to take her? Socially or physically? Elspeth had not. It drew attention. Fiona crossed the room with a determined speed, rescuing a policeman from becoming an exhibit. Stoss. Elspeth, good. You're here. You invited him, Hamish asked. Fiona looked at him. The committee invited him. A committee's useful that way. He has nearly 2 million viewers. That's a great many people to have correcting you. Fiona ignored this. Marcus Vale arrived 12 minutes later. He did not enter a room so much as provide it with an audience. He was in his mid-40s, handsome in the polished manner of television men who had learned exactly side of the face welcomed a camera. His silvering hair had been arranged to look ostentatiely distinguished, boots entirely unsuited to the churchyard mud, and a burgundy scarf that appeared to have travelled separately. Behind him came a young cameraman and a pale woman with a clipboard. Marcus spread his hands. Wonderful. Nobody knew what he meant, but smiled. Easy clipboard woman, and walked directly toward Mrs. Wellington's display. Now this, he said, is. Mrs. Wellington brightened. Marcus bent over her Bible. The Bible was large, brown, metal-clasped and accompanied by a reading. Wellington family, Biblin the family, since the 17th century. Marcus studied the title, then he smiled. Not quite. Mrs. Wellington's expression changed. Marcus pointed. 1826. Yes, said Mrs. Wellington, but the Bible is older. The printing is usually a useful clue. My grandfather said. I'm sure he did. It was said pleasantly. That made it worse. Marcus looked around as if the room might appreciate. Alec Brodie did not. He had stopped tattling his lip. Mrs. Wellington drew herself. The family owned a Bible in the 17th century. A Bible. This Bible. Marcus gave her the smile. Members of the public. No. The meeting room became very quiet. Hamish had seen men threaten each other outside pubs with less concentrated hostility. Elspeth wrote something in her notebook. Marcus moved on. Within 5 minutes he had corrected military date, questioned the provenance of the christening cup, and informed Nessie Curry that a photograph labelled man photographed in North Fergus almost certainly showed a man for America. That proves it then, Cetty said. Marcus blinked. He was in America. Jessie nodded. We always said so. Marcus opened and continued toward the vestry. Hamish hid a smile. Fiona had arranged the parish registers beneath protective glass on 2 long tables. The oldest books, register, their bindings from the 1940s. We had opened insane beans. To keep the pages from lifting, Fiona had used a broad old brass page clip. Marcus noticed it immediately. What a lovely thing. That said. Clip. He bent closer. The brass had darkened with age, as neat as a bite from a tiny moon. A long one. Been dropped, has it? Probably dozens of times. Marcus touched the air above it touching the men, and still in service splendid. Fiona adjusted the archival tissue beneath the page. As she did so, Hamish noticed a faint greenish curve, where damp brass ye be nothing more than nothing worth remembering. Marcus turned his attention to the register. His expression altered. The television warmth did not disappear altogether, but something sharper came through it. He bent lower. What year does the Menzies display begin? Fiona hesitated. The proper documented line, 17. Proper documented line. Alec Brodie had nearer. My transcription begins earlier, he said. Marcus glanced at him. Does it? 1759 provisionally. Provisionally is a useful word. So is attribution, Alex. The clipboard woman looked up. Elst stopped writing. Fiona placed one hand on the table. Before everyone begins examining documents. Perhaps, but examining documents is rather the point. His voice shouts. His eyes did not. For the first time that morning. And Nancy, not danger. Nothing's. Only the discomfort that came gathering stopped playing by the friendly rules. Marcus read one line again. Then he glanced toward Fiona's family tree hanging on the vestry wall. He said softly. Fiona heard him. What? Marcus smiled. Oh, nothing yet. That yet travelled farther through the kirk than a louder word might have done. Outside, against the windows, Mrs. Wellington's was muttering out about 1826. Nessie and Jessie had already begun discussing whether Marcus Vale was married. Alec Brodie stood with his arms folded, looking at the television genealogist as if he very much to correct. You said, and Elspeth caught Hamish watching Marcus. She raised one eyebrow. Hamish looked back at the names on the wall. The weekend had been open less than an hour. Already everybody seemed to have brought more history than they meant to display. Ali, at his grandfather, was somebody's. By 2:30 the man's drawing-room had taken on the sort of warmth, weather-overfilled teapots and human curiosity are shut up together. Rain ticked against the windows in a steady patient wane, ye made no longer threatening to Yant's wool and PTS. Someone had moved 2 armchairs to make space for trestle tables. The minister's wife had produced enough starnors to sit Tojin to stand either a church social or a siege. Cups chimed. Helmet's small group seemed to be discussing the dead with the deep personal investment ordinarily reserved for the living. Then Chet Pranasiatha. Hamish stood near the fireplace, holding a cup of tea he had no real wish to drink, and looking as though he might leave at any moment. He had perfected that look over the years. It did not fool Elspeth in the least. You look trapped, she said, coming to stand beside him. I am trapped. You're in a drawing-room with tea. That's how it starts. Elspeth smiled into her cup. She had taken a colour to her face. Hamish was aware of it in the same inconvenient way. He was aware of the rain on the windows and the chair leg pressing against his boot. He was aware of the rain across the room. Marcus enjoying himself. That in itself made him stand out. Most of the villagers were treating the afternoon mixed of social occasion and minest. Marcus thou hast tried it with excellent productions and hand. You'll sting with expressions who were listening and crown the stess speaking divided to a cluster of women who were expressions divided between admiration and distrust. It's never the obvious line that matters, he was saying. People focus on surnames, but surnames, land transfer, godparent patterns, witness names. That is where the truth hides. Very good company. Marcus gave her had learned to welcome interruption so long as it came dressed as flattery. At a small side table near the window sat Ruth Calf. She was in her late 20s, fair-haired spend, snack expect to spend Saturday assisting history, and had then agreed to spend a Saturday, set starts when aft, which she harked at the hair, and helped at village events to be found, and gets to someone amounted almost to a public duty, which in Lochdubh, Ementid Yuan Den said she was not the sort of person the room maintained its tension. Hamish had often thought than the people who did. That, sorting a stack of papers, was practised hand. Yea. Everything about Fiona's manner said useful, orderly, dependable. If she had harboured any irritation toward Marcus that morning, he showed in of a woman determined not to let a guest to become a public. Nuisance. Alec Brodie sat by the far bookcase with a plate on his knee. He had brought a bundle of notes which he kept resting algically necessaire, as if the afternoon might at any moment require documentary intervention. Nessie and Jessie Kraut in slow orbit, hearing far more than they said and saying quite enough. The television man has marvellous teeth, observed quietly. That means money, said Jessie. Or a dentist. Same thing. The minister's wife. If everyone would like to talk us through a few submitted family queries before supper. Shoo, that was generous of him, murmured. Elspeth looked at him. You sound as if you've identified the flaw. I'm waiting for it to declare itself. Chairs were drawn into arms of sofas. Rain beat harder for a moment, then eased again. Marcus stepped forward with the easy confidence of a man used to rooms arraying themselves around him. What I thought, he said, might be interesting this afternoon is to take 3 or 4 little family stories, sometimes beautifully, sometimes dexconocisingly, surprisingly, helpfully, repeated Alec Brodie under his breath, as if the word offended him. Marcus C. Now first we have a charming question about a great-great-aunt believed to have eloped with a via Inverness. The first case went well enough, only a marriage delayed by a fishing and dumb notions with leisure and imagination. The second concerned a man said to have died heroically. At sea, Marcus tactfully, and from a cart. Marx! That was still, Mrs. Wellington said. Marcus inclined his head graciously. Indeed. There was laughter. The room loosened a little. Even Marcus understood an audience sense. Then Marcus opened the third folder. Miss Ruth Kerr, he said. You've brought something. Ruth, who had been half hidden at the back, looked up. It was only curiosity. Really? Curiosity is the engine of all family history, said Marcus, and often the destroyer of family legend. The line earned a chuckle from 1 or 2 visitors who did not know well enough to fear what might follow. Marcus spread several papers on the little writing table beside him. 2 letters, a photograph of a severe young woman in a dark coat. Mum, your late grandmother records from 1951 onward as the daughter of John and Elspeth Cottage straightforward. Perfectly. Ruth gave a small nod. However, Mark looked up, savouring the pause a little too much. Which is where it becomes... The room grew quiet. Ruth laughed, fainted. Interesting is all right. Yes. Well... Marcus tapped one birth year-strected date. Seems to be as evidence of an informal fostering name. What does appear is grandmother and the date Moray Dorbiaptim's under arrangement. In plain terms, your grandmother had been raised by the Kerrs, but not born to them. No one spoke. A teacup clicked softly against a saucer somewhere near the back. Ruth smiled by degrees, as if her face had not yet caught up with the words. I see, she said. Marcus, encouraged by perhaps mistook for composure, went on. This kind of arrangement was not uncommon. One finds circumstances and social embarrassment intersect. The interesting question is who she was before she became a Kerr. Fiona stepped forward. He's fully understood it. I don't think, she said. That tone. Marcus turned. In what tone? As if she were an entertainment. Family history is public history. Not always. Surely the whole point of today is discovery. Ruth said, but it was not in the room. Knew it. The minister's wife made a small, distressed movement with the teapot, as though fresh pouring might mend the situation. Marcus softened his voice. Miss Kerr, I don't mean to upset you. Quite the reverse. These hidden branches... Ruth folded her hands together tightly. I only wondered why the line stopped. It may have stopped, Marcus said, because someone wanted it. That was a sentence designed for television. It landed badly in a Highland drawing room. Alec Brodie rose from his chair with the stiffness of an elderly man, propelled by indignation. Or it may have stopped, because local knowledge was ignored in favour of performance. Marcus turned, and, I beg your pardon. Alec moved closer. You sweep in. gather what others have spent years preserving, and then present it as if truth began their camera arrived. A murmur ran through the room. The Curry sisters had stopped breathing in unison. Marcus looked almost delighted. A Mr. Brodeen researcher. Isn't it? The unpaid one, said Alec. How noble. How local. A small pink he appeared. I have supplied freely to libraries, families, and historical societies for 30 years. I'm sure you have. And I've seen whole paragraphs of my transcriptions used elsewhere without so much as a thank you. Shh, Marcus smiled. If information is accurate, yard, reaches, what matters of it, said Alex, is that you don't how to say it into our own. Because you know. For a moment, Hamish thought Marcus might truly lose his temper. Not loudly. Men like Marcus rarely wasted anger in a way that spoiled his face. But something cold came into his... My dear Brodie, if you're in... Us! Suitable. I imagine more people... The words, that them... Crueler. Alec went white. Hamish set down his cup. Before he could step in, the front door opened and banged in the hallway. Utius Mint came through with Detective Chief Inspector Bliles. A gust of gets... Blair filled a doorway in a manner proportioned to his actual size. He was broad damps with the village for existing. He had a cigarette in one hand and the remains of rain on his overcoat. Gave me munty. What's all this? Ye tea, Mrs. McLean said carpet. Said. Blair ignored her. He looked around the room and fastened at once on the largest concentration of discomfort. Macbeth, I was told the television lot were here. Thought I'd better see nobody was killing one another over a family tree. No one's killing anyone-ish. That's because I've arrived in time. Lucky for us. Blair sniffed. His gaze landed on Ruth, whose face was still pale, then on Alec, who looked as if he might throw either... What's this one done? Blair asked. So you can maybe speak of him by name, said I. This one. Blair waved a hand. Oh, for God's sake, which one he was objecting? Tellyman. Alec said, I am. Of course you are. Great-grandfather, not a laird after all? There was a brittle silence. Blair, sensing distress and taking the wrong lessons from it. And what's the lassie looking like that for? Ruth stared at him. Mrs. Wellington hissed. Blair glanced at Marcus, now that there was official audience. Marcus said, sensitive family question may have arisen, as if requesting a biscuit. No one answered. Blair shrugged. Other though... Hamish turned his head, looked at him fully. It was a small movement, but Elspeth, watching from him at once, his face stayed mild. His voice, when he spoke, became softer rather than louder. She shook. If you can manage decency in a room full of people, he said. Blair blinked. The room went still. Nessie Curry looked in from one man to the other. With reverent interest, Blair coloured. You watch yourself, Macbeth. You might do the same. For an instinct it seemed Blair would bluster aside. Then he noticed that, though crude, were not entirely useless. And, instincts, he gave a snort. Fine. Carry on being delicate, and help himself to 2 shortbread fingers in the manner of a man, compensating for lost authority. Declared that perhaps formal queries had gone on long enough. Chairs scraped back. People broke into uneasy little knots of conversation. Ruth slipped an answering shift. Jano Schletter with her papers gathered against her chest. Slipped war. Hamish crossed to her. You all right? She tried to smile and nearly managed it. I don't know yet. You don't have to listen to any more of it. No, but I did bring the papers. That doesn't mean you invited half a room to stare at. Ruth looked down at the photograph in her hand. My gran never said much about her people. I thought maybe there was a sad story. She stopped. That there'd be an audience, Hamish said. She gave a short breath that might have become a laugh. Somewhere? No! Before he could say more, Fiona came over. Ruth, why don't you leave the labels for now? I'll finish them. You've enough to do. I'm quite able. Her tone knitted. Hamish heard strain. Ruth nodded and set the box on the sill. Thank you. When she had gone to the hall for her coat, that asked whether he had any intention of removing Blair from the planet. Must he always appear where tact has just died? tact was looking frail before he came in. Fiona's mouth spite of herself. Across the room, Alec Brodie was collecting his notes with hands not entirely steady. Marcus was speaking quietly to the clipboard woman and glancing now and then toward the door through which Ruth had gone. "He's on." Elspeth had positioned herself beside the bookcase, watching everyone at once. She met Hamish and tipped her head a fraction toward Marcus. Later, then. Hamish waited until the room had thinned a little. Blair was occupied with the second plate to be licensed, who now had stalked off to a familist to rural events ought to be his hat. Alec had stalked off to the hallway in Wellington, who now wished to know whether Aintree could be provisionally and improved later, if one's people, dated, if one's people turned out better than expected. Hamish moved to Marcus' side. "You've a good way with folk," he said. Marcus looked amused. "I detect irony. You've a great gift for it." Marcus glanced toward the rain-dark window. "Local sensitivities are always the most dramatic. Ruth Kerr's grandmother is no a dramatic device." "No," said Marcus. "Rather more." Hamish waited. Marcus lowered his voice. "There's an alteration in register." "Is there?" "Oh, yes. Veris entered as Morag Fraser appears to have been changed. In another hand to Morag Menzies. Morag Mens sa Ancius." Hamish said nothing. Marcus watched him. Pleased effect of his own "That sort of family tree." There was a slight sound behind them. Fiona stood near enough to hear, still resting on Mrs. Wellington's folder. For the first time that afternoon, left her face altogether. "So, only for a second. If there is some archival query evenly, rather than discussing queerly, Mr. Scum, saps, you should bring it to me rather." Marcus smiled. "My dear Miss Menzies, I should hate to discuss this lightful in a corner. It deserves proper light. The register's shouting. So are reputations." Hamish saw something pass between them, then something quick and old-fashioned in its bitterness, though one of them had only arrived that morning. Elspeth came up beside Hamish just as Blair, mouthful of shortbread, called about crowd management. "Macbeth, after you're done mentioned," and Elspeth's eyes danced. "Are you done flirting?" Hamish looked at her. "With Blair? Never." She laughed, and Fiona, having recovered herself, turned away to answer Mrs. Wellington with great precisions of her provisional ancestors. "Son, outside. Been." Inside, what had begun as a harmless-at-village event had acquired the first unmistakable edge of trouble. And what? The register, after dark. By evening the rain had ceased, pretending to be temporary. It came steadily over the hills. Flattening the grass had disappeared altogether. The mountains reduced to a handful ribbon of black water. Lochdubh seemed reduced to a handful of lit windows, and the occasional moving headlamp, the ruins that looked uncertain of its own destination, had been side to visitors. That did not mean everyone had gone home. Hamish discovered this when he returned shortly after 8, intending only to check the doors and make certain Marcus Vale's television crew had not left cables where a named churchgoer might kill herself over them in the morning. Marcus was in the vestry. He had removed his jacket and rolled his shirt sleeve precisely enough to suggest that even informality required preparation. Fiona Menzies' family Bible, several saints, several danger saints, horses, and sheets of notes, and a battery-powered reading lamp. Alec Brodie stood him. The two men were not speaking. That was worse. Fiona rigid patience of someone tidying was between them, while replacing sheets occupants elsewhere, she stew. "You Hamish stopped in the doorway. "I thought this place was shut." "It is," said Fiona. Marcus did not look up. "I have permission." "You have my permission to examine the materials until 9, Fiona said, "not to reorganize the archive. I've moved 6 inches of paper." "You moved the accession folder temporarily." Without asking, Marcus sighed. "A researcher must occasionally touch things." Alec said a tame presenter must occasionally ask. Marcus glanced at him. "I thought you had gone." "I forgot my notebook." "You've been remembering it for 20 minutes. Alec's mouth tightened. Hamish stepped further into the vestry. "What notebook?" "The blue one," said Alec. Marcus looked. "Do we need to record its genealogy?" Alec took one step. Fiona said sharply. Enough. There was more authority in the single word than Blair generally managed with a room full of constables. Alec stopped. He looked older than he had that afternoon. The public insult had stayed with him. Hamish could see it in the care. "I'll find it myself," Alec said. "You're locking the archive at 9. Marcus leaned over the register again. "There is still an archive worth locking." Fiona's hand paused above the tissue. Hamish noticed. "So you found something?" he asked. Marcus glanced at him. "A number of things. That usually means one. Does it?" Marcus sat back. "All right. One particularly interesting thing," Fiona said. "Mr. Vale," he ignored her, "is not bit becoming Morag Menzies." "It is merely a Alec had gone very still. Marcus tapped his pencil against the table. "The original hand is consistent with the surrounding entries. I would say. Years later, You cannot date handwriting to a year by looking at it," said Alec. "No, but I can compare it later annotations and same book. You haven't tested the ink. I don't need to test every cup to know the kettle boiled." Alec gave a short, contemptuous laugh. Marcus smiled back. Hamish looked at Fiona. She was watching the register rather than either man. "Who would have had access to it?" he asked. "Half a dozen people over the years," she said. "Ministers, session clerks, archivists." "Yourself." "Of course." Marcus turned one page carefully, and perhaps somebody with a particular interest in the Menzies line. Now Fiona met his eyes. "You are making an—" "Not yet. You seemed disappointed. See, Before Marcus could answer, the darkness was complete. Somewhere in the meeting room a chair scraped. Alec swore. Fiona said, Marcus laughed softly. "How atmospheric." "Be quiet," said Fiona. Hamish heard rain hammering the stained glass, and the soft shifting sounds of 4 people trying not to bump into furniture. The safe. He took a small torch from his pocket and switched it on. The beam caught Marcus first, then Alec, standing the filing cupboard with one hand raised. "You carry that everywhere?" Marcus asked. "I live in the Highlands." "That Sclanes and South." Fiona went to a drawer and produced 2 battery lanterns. "The search this in heavy weather. Shum! It's Hamish." Their pale glow changed the vestry without making it sinister. It simply looked older. The varnished cupboards seemed to belong more naturally, and the Bible on the table seemed to belong naturally. Alec found his blue notebook under a stack of exhibition, a catalogue. "I told you I left it." "No one doubted the notebook," said Marcus. Alec looked at him. "You think because people watch you on television, nobody sees what you are." Marcus's expression barely shifted. "And what am I?" "Hungry." Marcus gave a small laugh. "For what?" "Other people's secrets." The rain filled the silence that followed. Fiona picked up the Menzies Bible. "That is enough work for tonight." Marcus placed one hand lightly over the book. "I'm not finished. It belongs to my family. And you loaned it." Exhibit. "Not for unlimited examination." Marcus lowered his voice. "Fiona, you know perfectly well what I'm looking at." Alec glanced between them. Hamish caught the use of her first name. So did Fiona. Her face hardened. "Remove your hand." Marcus did. Fiona took the Bible and held it against herself. For the first time saw the archivist but the owner. If I'm on, there was a difference. The lights flickered with a dull yellow buzz. Everyone blinked. Alec tucked his notebook beneath his coat. "I'm going." Fiona nodded. "I'll lock after you." Hamish followed Alec into the kirk. At the main door, Alec stopped. "He's wrong about one thing." "What?" "The family tree." "Whose?" Alec looked back toward the vestry. "The Menzies line." Hamish waited. Alec tapped his fingers against his lower lip. Then he seemed to think better of whatever he had intended to say. "Never mind." "Alec." But the old man pulled on his cap. "I've had enough of correcting people today." He went out into the rain. Hamish watched him cross the kirkyard and disappear toward the village. When he returned to the vestry, Fiona was gone. Marcus remained. The family Bible was gone lay open beneath the protective sheet. "You planning to sleep here?" Hamish asked. "I have rooms at the hotel." "That wasna what I asked." Marcus smiled. I need another hour. Fiona said 9. It's 8:43. You counted. I'm a genealogist. Hamish looked at the register. The old brass page clip held the right-hand nick. And you enjoy this, don't you? Hamish said. Marcus glanced up. Enjoy what? Knowing something other folk wish you didna. Marcus considered that. At least you ask good questions. And, yes, he said, I do. There was no shame in the answer. That made it more unpleasant than boasting would have been. Marcus pushed his chair back. People are never upset by facts as loans, Sergeant, where they have invested themselves in fiction. Asenko! Sometimes a story matters for reason besides whether it survives your paperwork. Spoken like a policeman in a village, and you speak like a man who he's before the damage is finished. For once, Marcus did not smile. Then the moment passed. Come the something later said, I may have something worth showing you. About the altered entry. About who altered it. Hamish studied him. You know, I have a very good idea. Then tell me now. Marcus shook his head. At until wrong in private, almost as much as I dislike being slap. That must make life. Only for other people. Hamish left him there. Elspeth stood beneath the kirk porch, buttoning her coat. You've a habit of appearing under roofs I'm leaving, Hamish said. I was waiting for the rain to ease. It's Scotland. I'm optimistic. That'll pass. She looked toward the lit vestry window. Marcus still inside. I come for a drink. Hamish looked at her. At the hotel. I know where drinks are generally kept. You look frightened. I am frightened. Of me. Of Nessie Curry seeing us. She already has. Hamish glanced toward the road. A cross-wind moved. Elspeth laughed. So? I've work. Of course you have. She turned up her collar. He watched her go down the path toward the hotel. He could have caught her easily. Instead, he stood beneath into the rain, then remained there long enough to become annoyed with himself. He heard a door close stone and weather. Yet can't say. Later, the cleaner would remember him returning for a scarf she had left in the meeting room. She would remember seeing the vestry light beneath the door. And she would remember voices. One belonged to Marcus Vale. The other was a woman's. She could not make out the words. Only that neither voice sounded friendly. By 10 o'clock a land branch had blocked the Upper Glen Road. The hotel staff had taken supper elsewhere. And his television crew assumed he was still working. Fiona Menzies said she had gone home before 9 to check on her elderly aunt. Alec Brodie said he had walked straight back to his cottage. Hamish returned to the kirk shortly 11. The vestry was empty. Marcus Vale was nowhere in sight. The baptism register still lay on the table. But one of its pages was gone. Chapter 4. The vestry. Marcus Vale was found at 7:20 the following morning by Mrs. McLean carrying a flask of tan tea and unreasonable belief that television people rose early. The rain had spent itself during the night. Mist lay low, Lochdubh. Water-softening grass shone gutters. Dark shone silver. The kirkyard grass stone, every footstep along the path, darkened the stone. Hamish was halfway through feeding lugs when the telephone rang. Mrs. McLean did not say that Marcus was dead. She said, I think you had better come. Something in her voice made him leave the bowl on the floor. Lugs looked after him with deep dissatisfaction. By the time Hamish reached the kirk with both hands around the untouched flask setting, dead. You didn't move anything, he asked. She shook her head. I went into the vestry because the archive door was open. I thought perhaps Misty. Then I saw his spectacles. That was as far as she wished to go. Hamish touched her shoulder briefly. Stay here. The short archive stair ran behind the vestry. 6 narrow small storage room where older registers and boxes of kirk papers were kept. Then Marcus lay at the bottom. There was no blood worth speaking of. Somehow made it worse. That one arm had fallen awkwardly beneath a chair. His spectacles lay several feet away beneath a cross floor, scattering photocopied certificates and handwritten notes. He and Sem's concess. The door at the head of the stairs stood ajar. Hamish crouched without touching the body. A fall was possible. The stages worn smooth by decades of feet. In poor light, a man distracted. By seas, she'd die. But Marcus had not merely been distracted. The right cuff of his shirt was torn. Hamish leaned closer. Something metallic was caught inside the fold. He did not remove it. He looked. The old brass page clip, the one from the baptism register. Its crescent-shaped nick showed plainly against the white cloth, and beneath it on Marcus' wrist was a faint curved smear of green. Hamish still for several seconds. Then he went outside and telephoned Strathbane. Said Blair arrived 90 minutes later in a mood suggesting had arranged his death personally to inconvenience him. The road had only just cleared enough for police vehicles. Blair came through the kirk door, sweating his overcoat, cigarette smoke following him, and Mrs. MacLean's pointed stare. Despite Mrs. Where is he? Vestry. Anyone touched the body? No. Good. Blair disappeared through the door with 2 officers and emerged again less than 5 minutes later. Nancy. Accident. Hamish looked at him. That was quick. Old stair. Falls, breaks his neck. Happens. MacNadim had the good sense to study the floor. Hamish said. Blair stopped. What page? One covering the altered entry Marcus was investigating. Blair stared at him. And you waited until now to mention that. You'd already solved it. Blair's eyes narrowed. Alec Brodie came through the kirk entrance. He was breathing hard from the walk and had forgotten to button his coat. I heard. Nobody asked how. That would have been an inquiry into natural law. Alec looked toward the vestry. Is it true? Said Hamish. Alec's face tightened, for all his plainly affected him. I told him to leave things alone. Blair turned immediately. You threatened him. No. You just said. I said I told him to leave things alone. Last night. Yes. Hamish watched Alec. You came back after leaving. Alec hesitated, only briefly. Blair noticed. When? I walked home. Then as I'd you up. You told us you'd found your notebook at the kirk. My blue left a small black one. Hamish frowned. You did a mention returning. I didn't think it mattered. Blair gave a humourless laugh. A man you're publicly quarrelling with ends up dead, and you don't think going back to the building matters? I didn't see Marcus. What time? Alec looked toward the clock above the kirk door. After 9, 15. How long were you here? 10 minutes. And nobody saw you. I don't know. Blair's expression brightened unpleasantly. He had begun the morning with possession of a suspect, saying, Don't leave the village. Alec stared at him. The road's blocked. All the better. After Alec had gone, Fiona Menzies arrived. She had dressed. Hamish noticed because Fiona normally looked composed without appearing to have worked at it. Her dark peering was exact, her hair pinned firmly back, yet dark coat immaculate. Mrs. MacLean met her at the door. Oh, Fiona. Fiona took both her hands. I heard from Nessie. Of course you did. For one instanting almost humour passed between them, and Nanstant somethings like humux. Surviving when me... Then Fiona looked at Hamish. Was it a fall? We don't know yet. Her gaze shifted toward Blair. Blair Setsley murdered. Hamish looked at him. Had definitely an accident. Fiona went pale. The missing page? Hamish asked. Her head turned sharply. What about it? It's gone. She stared at him. That cannot be. You saw it last. I saw the register before I left. With Marcus? Yes. What time did you leave? A little before 9. You said you were going to your aunt. I did. How long were you there? Until nearly 10. Blair said, Can she confirm? Fiona's expression hardened. She can confirm what ebb? She remembers. Hamish asked, Kirk. No. The answer came cleanly. Perhaps two's cleanly. Blair began questioning her about Marcus' interest in Imold. But Hamish he returned to the vestry. MacNab had begun photographing the scene. Macbeth called, Don't interfere. I'm looking. You're always looking. Aye, says me talking. Hamish crouched again beside Marcus. The brass clip was still caught in the torn cuff. Under better light, the green mark had pressed against cloth or skins. Shisku, Marcus could it accidentally while working. That was possible. But the register had misgay. Heish, Marcus had died on the archive stairs several feet away. For the clip to be inside his cuff, something had happened between those two places. Hamish looked up the stair. At the top, the archive door remained partly open. One edge showed a fresh scrape. He did not yet know what it meant. That was all right. He disliked clues that arrived already explaining themselves. Outside, more villagers had begun appearing along the kirk wall. News, despite repeated instructions to go home. Faster than weather in Lochdubh, Elspeth stood apart from the others. She did not approach Hamish immediately. She studied his face and asked only, "Bad?" "Aye." "The fall." "Maybe." She glanced toward the kirk. Marcus told me yesterday had changed a record. Did he say who? He said he'd know by morning. Hamish looked back at the open door. Marcus Vale had indeed known something by morning. The trouble was that he could no longer say what. And upstairs in the vestry, Anansi's Voves, safely for had somehow travelled with him to the bottom of the stair. Chapter 5. The map. Alec Brodie's cottage stood above the lower road, behind a hedge that had surrendered, longer weather and neglect. Inside was worse. Every available surface held paper. There were census transcripts on the sideboard, folders stacked beside the coal scuttle, and 3 cardboard boxes marked Mackenzie. Mackenzie. Definitely not that one. Hamish stood in the middle of the sitting room. Research could live so peacefully inside his own filing system. "You'll skim." Alec pointed to an armchair. "You can move those." Hamish looked at the pile occupying it. "What are they?" "Dens." "I'll stand." Alec grunted and sat at the kitchen table. He had recovered some of his colour since the kirk, though indignation remained his chief source of warmth. Blair had sent Hamish to take a proper statement because, as Blair Goat, likes you. This was news to both men. Hamish accepted a mug of tea that seemed to have been made from leaves with genealogies of their own. "You went back to the kirk after 9, he said. "I told you." "You told me after Marcus was dead." "I didn't kill him." "That wasna my question." Alec tapped 2 fingers against his lower lip. "I reached the kirk about 9:15. The front door had... Was the power on?" "Yes." "Did you hear anyone?" "No." "See anyone?" Alec hesitated. Hamish waited. The cottage clock ticked with the most of its surroundings. "I saw light under the vestry door," Alec said at last. "You went in?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I heard Marcus moving about, and I had no wish to speak to you. You were angry enough with him earlier." "That is precisely why I had no wish to speak to him." It was a reasonable answer. Reason to gun to bother. Answer says, "So you took your notebook and left?" "Yes." "Which notebook?" "The black one." "Where was it?" "Under the chair by exhibition boards." "You did a go near the archives?" "No." "The baptism register?" "No." "Marcus?" "No." Alec leaned forward. "I does not. Crime. The say usually no saves prison space." Alec almost smiled. Then Hamish said, "What did you when you told me Marcus was wrong about the Menzies line?" The smile disappeared. Alec looked down at his tea. "Old parish families collect stories about themselves." "Every family does." "Yes, but some publish booklets." Hamish waited. Alec sighed. "Fiona has all household continuous line as unusual as record. No gaps worth speaking of." But there were gaps. "What sort?" "Domestic service gaps. Children appearing in other households. Names reused. Is made from untidy people. The sort of thing." "Did Fiona know?" "Of course she knew." "You told her." "Years ago." "And?" "She said my evidence was circumstantial." "Was it?" Alec bristled. "No." There was a knock on the door. It opened before Alec could answer. Blair came in with Macnab behind him. No one had invited either man. Blair looked around the cottage and grimaced. Christ, if there's a fire in here. And Alec stood. What do you want? Your document case. My what? The brown case you took to the kirk yesterday. Alec's face changed. Hamish noticed. Blair noticed too. Where is it? By the desk. Macnab crossed the room and the battered leather case from beside a cabinet. Open it, said Blair. Alec stared at him. Have you a warrant? Blair smiled. You want me to get one. There followed the sort of silence, its legal principles. And Alec took the case and opened the brass catches. Inside were photocopied 2 pencils, a magnifying glass, of photocopied parish records. Macnab lifted the first, then the second. Beneath them lay a single old sheet of paper. Nobody moved. Alec went pale. Hamish stepped closer. The paper was thick cream huddled in the style of the kirk. Register. Names ran down it in fading ink. Blair gave a low, satisfied sound. Well, well, Alec whispered. That was not. Blair looked almost cheerful. The missing page. It was not there. Macnab put on gloves. Hamish said nothing. He did not need to. The page contained the altered entry. Morag Fraser. Morag Menzies. Blair rounded on Alec. You publicly accuse the dead man of stealing your research. You go back to the kirk after hours. He turns up dead. And the missing page turns up in your bag. I never took it. Of course not. I did not. Alec's voice cracked on the last word. That affected Hamish shouting. Would have done. Alec was proud, inch infrequently exhausting. But pride had been holding upright all morning, and now fear had got underneath it. Blair. You. Anything else you'd like to investigate, Macbeth? Maybe who baked the shortbread? Hamish looked at the page. Something troubled him. Not enough to name. Not yet. Macnab carefully slid the sheet into an evidence sleeve. Alec sat down heavily. I did not, he said again. This time he sounded as if he were speaking only to Hamish. Tie. By noon Alec was instructed. By 12:30, half of Lochdubh. By 1, the other half had corrected several details. Original parish, register, undercoat. Jessie had heard it was inside his hat. Mrs. Wellington maintained she had always thought, a criticism that would have sapped her faulty interest in other people's grandmothers. Get surprised familiar with genealogy. Ruth Kerr said nothing at all. Hamish found her behind the hotel reception desk, sorting receipts. With more care than the task required. Have they arrested him? She asked, questioning him. He said, do you think he did it? Hamish leaned against the desk. I think Blair does. That wasn't what I asked. No. Ruth looked at him. Hamish sighed. I don't know. She nodded. And Farsesdane. On the wall behind her hung an old photograph of the way. Ye see, him several dim students. Marcus embarrassed Alec in front of everyone, Ruth said. People do terrible things when they are made ridiculous. Aye. She looked up. But Marcus crack. Hamish said nothing. Ruth gave a small I didn't kill him either. No! Funny how quickly you begin explaining yourself when somebody else gets accused. That stayed with Hamish. Blair was already celebrating when Hamish reached Strath. The police canteen had produced a plate of something brown beside boiled potatoes, and Blair was eating it with the appetite of a man whose confidence had removed the need for flavour. There he is, said. Hamish looked at the plate. What did it do? What? To deserve that? Blair ignored him. Alec's fingerprints are all over the case. It's his case. And he admits going back. Aye. And the pages inside it. Aye. Blair pointed his fork. Sometimes, Macbeth, a thing is exactly what it looks like. That must be comforting. It's called police work. Hamish watched him chew. Any prints on the slab? Being checked. Fibrous. Being checked. Time of death. Likely between 9 and 11. So anybody trapped in the village could have... Blair put down his fork. Are you deliberately thick? Only when it helps. Blair pushed the plate. The man hated Vale. Vale humiliating tore him down the stair, shoved him down, and took it because it linked to whatever they were arguing about, then forgot he had it. Panicked. He spent 30 years handling old documents and panicked by putting one loose in his working case. People do stupid things after murder. Aye, before it too. Blair's face darkened. Hamish left before either of them had to develop the thought. He crossed 2 streets to the little Italian restaurant he used whenever Strastas required active maintenance. There were only 3 customers inside. Hame his notes across the corner table and asked Macnab to let him look once more at the evidence photograph of the genealogy page. Macnab, whose relationship with Blair had taught him the value of 10 minutes later, brought it up. Hamish ate slowly. The soup was hot, thick with tomatoes and herbs, and made by someone to believe food should survive contact with a human being. He studied the photograph, then stopped eating. Macnab. Aye. Zoom in on the upper right corner. Macnab enlarged the image on the tablet. Hamish leaned closer. The baptism register had been exhibition by the old brass. It had sat on the same area of the page for hours. Hamish remembered the pale archival tissue beneath it, and the curved green stain. He remembered Marcus's cuff, the verdigris crescent, but on the page found in Alec's case there was no green mark at all. The pad carried a shallow rectangular impression. Straight sides, clean corners. Hamish sat back. Asked Macnab. That page wasna under the brass clip. Macnab looked again. You sure? I saw what the brass left on the damp metal. Green curve. He pointed to the photograph. That's pressure from something flat. An archival clamp. Aye. Macnab's face changed. So the page found in Brodie's case was taken out before last night. Hamish finished the thought silently. Someone had removed the real sheet earlier. Someone had put something else in its place beneath a modern clamp. Then Arcus died Gimalanid in Alec Brodie's document case, where Blair's was almost certain to find it. That changed the shape of Alec's anger was real. His humiliation was real. His return to the kirk was real, which was such a good senspet. You see, Hamish looked down at the soup now cooling. For once Blair had found evidence so convenient that even Hamish had nearly believed, and that, he thought, was the trouble. Someone else had believed in it first. Chapter 6. Hamish. The photograph was in a plain brown envelope among Marcus Vale's papers. Hamish missed it. By late afternoon, the kirk meeting room had become an unofficial evidence store. Boxes sat where soup urns had stood the day before, which meant the cameraman's checking Marcus's working notes. You'll stay right where's you are, Wom, groused Jane. He sten spent unstara nuta producer muchister in sen calls in a voice intended to suggest that murder was chiefly a scheduling problem. Hamish sat at the end of a trestle table sorting photocopies. Marcus had been methodical to produce a strong filming. Wrote budded sesamai, added coloured tabs separate from material intended for filming, added originals to anything, potential lines in the margins. Beside a baptism certificate he'd written, a family script for 3 generations. Hamish disliked the question mark most. It was a small piece, assurance. If the claim wrong had always been there. He turned to the next envelope. Inside was a copied photograph, grainy and slightly crooked. 2 women sat outside a stone house. One was perhaps 20 dress. The other was older and held a baby wrapped in a knitted shawl. On the back, Marcus had copied an original handwritten note. Jane Menzies with Morag and 1948. Below that, he had written in pencil, compare ages. Ask FM. Hamish stared at it. The older woman was Fiona's mother. He knew the face from the family display in the kirk. The baby, if Marcus's dates were right, could be Ruth Kerr's grandmother. He read through the surrounding notes. One household record placed Ruth's grandmother with the Kerr family the following year. Another identified a young housemaid named Morag Fraser, working in the Menzies household during. Marcus had drawn a line between, then another line. At the bottom of the page, he'd and writ possibility. Hidden, daughter later fostered as Kerr. Hamish sat back. A television man could make half an hour out of that. Lochdubh could make half a century. The sensible thing was bag the photograph, log it, hand it to Macnab. Let Blair discover what he would discover. Hamish folded his arms. The more sensible the thing became, the less he liked it. He could already imagine Blair holding the copy in front of Ruth, could already hear the question, "So which family are you supposed to belong to then?" Hamish looked toward the kirk door. Ruth had been humiliated once. He told himself there was no need for it to happen again, merely because police procedure enjoyed an audience almost as much as Marcus had. That was the argument. It was not a good one. He knew that. He put the photograph back in the envelope, anyway. Where the road rose past two upper end of the village, where the road rose, becoming a track. Rainwater still ran in thin streams along the verges. Hamish found her outside, beating a small rug over the garden wall with more violence than the rug appeared to deserve. She stopped when she saw him. "Have they let Alec go?" "Not yet." "Then you're not here with good news." "Depends." "That usually means no." Hamish held out the envelope. This was among Marcus's copies. Ruth did not take it immediately. "What is it?" "A photograph." "I guessed that much. Fnassi stastum." "Ah?" Ruth's face became still. Hamish added, "You don't have to look now. That would be worse." She took the envelope. They went inside. The cottage was small and warm, with a pair of work shoes drying beside the hearth. A hotel uniform hung from the back of a chair, chine steaming on it. On the mantelpiece stood a photograph of an elderly woman with Ruth's eyes. Eve, her grandmother. Ruth took Marcus' copy to the window. For a long moment she said nothing. "That's Miss Menzies," she said at last. "Fiona's mother. I know." She looked closer. "My gran knew her." "You're sure?" "Oh, yes." Hamish leaned as the kitchen table. "How?" Ruth frowned. She used to see her sometimes. Not often. I thought it... When you were young. Yes. Did Fiona ever visit? Not that I remember. Ruth turned the photograph over. "What does Marcus think this proves?" "Nothing by itself." "That isn't what I asked." Hamish sighed. "He thought your grandmother may have been born into the Menzies. Hold! I'll sout and sauce him, may. Just the Island, Brodrenbar." Ruth sat down. The kettle... Neither moved to it. After a while, Ruth said, "So when's... He didn't know what really meant any more than anyone else." Her mouth tightened. "People always say that. I mean it." "I know." She looked again at the photograph. "My gran loved the Kerrs. That matters." Would it matter to Marcus? No. That earned the faintest smile. Ruth rose and switched off the kettle. "Why did you bring this to me?" Hamish looked toward the window. "So you could see it before Blair did." Her hand stopped on the teaspoon. "You haven't logged it." There it was. The question he had hoped she would not ask. Not yet. Ruth stared at him. "Hamish." You shouldn't have done that." "No. You're a policeman on difficult days. That's not funny." "No." She sat down again. For a moment they listened to water ticking from the gutter out. Then Ruth said, "Thank you." Hamish looked at her. She shook her head. "I still think it was wrong." "So do I. That makes it worse." If Blair discovered it less than 2 hours later. Document copied for filming. Marx's producer. Item 27 read, "Photo, come." Copy. Yeah. Item 27 was not in the evidence box. By 6:00 station. Demanding to know who had taken. By 6:30 he knew. Hamish could hear him before it. "Have you lost your bloody mind?" Macnab looked down at his desk. Hamish closed the door. "I know where it is." "That's your defence?" "No. You removed evidence from a murder inquiry, direct connected to the material being investigated. A copied photograph. Evidence." "Aye." Blair's face had gone beyond red into a colour rarely seen. Shout. "What if she burns it? There are other copies. What if she lies about it? She hadna seen it before." "And how exactly do you know that?" Hamish did not answer. Blair jabbed a finger at him. "You're finished this time, Macbeth. Interfering with Transford so far north, you'll need a passport to come back." "Yes, Nancy, further north than Lochdubh will take some planning." "Do you think this is funny?" "No." That stopped Blair for a fraction of a second. Hamish went on. "Ye Steve sing?" MacNab looked up. Blair appeared almost disappointed. He had prepared himself for resistance. "Hey," he said, "you did." The words landed harder because Blair was right. By the next morning was no longer private. His station established. Hamish suspected it required Blair shouting. Enough people knew Ruth had been questioned again. Enough people had seen Fiona leave the stations, tight, fey-faced and silent, in a village did not leak. It breathed. At Patel's shop, 2 visitors from Inverness were discussing whether Ruth might inherit. Neither knew there was anything to inherit. Mrs. Wellington had decided Ruth looked like Fiona around the chin. Nessie Curry had heard only that Ruth's grandmother might have been born in the Menzies' house. Jessie that being born did not. Ruth went to work at the hotel. By 11, she'd been asked 3 times whether she intended to change her surname. At 8:30 it must be visitor told her, must be to discover who you really are. At noon, Ruth took off her apron and walked out. Hamish found her behind the hotel near the bins, sitting on an upturned crate. She had been crying and was angry, that he had noticed. "Don't," she said. "Did I say anything?" "You were going to." "I was going to ask whether you wanted tea." "That's worse." Hamish stood beside the wall. "They look at me as if I'm a new exhibit." "Shh! I know." "No, you don't." She rubbed at her face, impatient. "Yesterday, I had one grandmother. A bloodline and possible property rights. You've still got the same grandmother." Ruth gave him a look. "That sounds sensible enough to be useless." "Aye." They sat in silence. At tolls Tim stop. "Who?" "People at the kirk." Whether my gran knew who her father was. "So?" Hamish looked toward the road. "Fiona defended you." Fiercely. There was something curious in Ruth's tone. Not suspicion. Surprise. She said none of it was anybody's business. Hamish thought of Fiona at the manse when Marcus first embarrassed Ruth, the speed with which she had intervened, the anger. He had taken it for kindness. Perhaps it was. Kindness did not cease to be kindness merely because it had roots. Ruth pulled at a loose thread on her sleeve. "There is something else." "What?" "My gran used to get it every Christmas." Hamish waited. "No card." "No name." "What was in it?" "Biscuits, sometimes gloves, and soap." Ruth frowned. "Soup. Violet soap." Gran loved. "What made you think of that?" "Fiona." Ruth looked embarrassed by the connection. "When I was a child, Mrs. Menzies always smelled of the same violet soap. Our bathroom did too. I remember because Fiona let me wash my hands there once after church picnic came, and the parcels came from when, as long as I can remember. My mother said come when she was young too, so this wasna something Marcus discovered." "No." Ruth looked toward the hotel windows. Someone in that family already knew. Hamish felt the case shift again, quietly. The old secret had not lain forgotten until Marcus Vale arrived with a camera. Someone had remembered it. Someone had tended it. Christmas after Christmas, without acknowledgement, without a name. That evening Fiona came to the police cottage. She did not sit down. "You had no right to give Ruth that photograph." "I know. You exposed her." "I was trying to stop Blair doing exactly that, and in certain he could accuse her of hiding evidence." Hamish said nothing. Fiona's anger trembled at the edges now. "She has done nothing." "I know." "Then stop treating her as if her birth, or her grandmother's birth, is a police matter." Marcus made it part of one. No, Marcus made everything into material. There was pain beneath the words. Hamish watched her carefully. "Did your mother know Ruth's grandmother?" Fiona's expression changed. "Only slightly." "Yes." "How well?" "They were acquainted." "For a long time." "It was a small village." "Did your mother send her Christmas parcels?" Fiona looked directly at. "What?" It was not an answer. Hamish heard that. Fiona picked up her gloves from the table. "You have already done enough damage trying to be kind, Hamish." The words were not cruel. That made them harder to argue with. After she had gone, by the window, looking out at the wet village road. Lugs came in from the kitchen, then moved on with the stove when no immediate benefit presented itself. Then Hamish had wanted Ruth humiliation. Instead, he had given the village a larger one to share, and somewhere beneath all the gossip lay a quieter fact. For decades, someone in the Menzies family had kept Ruth's grandmother close enough to remember at Christmas, yet far enough away to remain unnamed. Chapter 7. The Bible without. The storm left Lochdubh scrubbed clean and slightly ashamed of itself. By morning the sky had cleared to a hard, pale blue. Water, ditch, talked busily to itself. Roofs dripped. The loch had turned from black to steese grey, with light moving across it in long, broken bands. Hamish walked to Fiona Menzies' house shortly after 10. He could have driven. He wanted the walk. Some cases improved when a man stopped moving papers around and allowed his mind to catch up with them. The facts did not yet make a tidy story. Marcus had discovered an old alteration in record. Someone had removed the relevant original page before his death, and later planted an Alec Brodie's case. The old brass clip had been caught in Marcus's torn cuff. Ruth's grandmother had been in the Menzies household for decades. Fiona had defended Ruth with why she might need defending. Cecime, none of that proved but Hamish no longer believed Fiona's family history was simply something Marcus had stumbled across. It was something Fiona had been living beside for most of her life. Her house stood near the edge of the village, a square grey building with white painted others, with often hewed in hills around it, had any intention of being. Sunzi sat on the low wall near the gate. Hamish stopped. Say, "What are you doing here?" Sunzi ans e. Aye. The cat's tail moved once. The thrush at its morning. Fiona opened the door before Hamish knocked. "You're becoming. That worries me. You had better come in." Her sitting room suited her. A china shepherdess stood on the mantelpiece beside a clock that ticked softly. Books occupied 2 shelves in exact height order. On a side 3 neatly folded newspapers, get tushies and a pair of reading glasses. There was also a smell of smoke. Not much. Enough. Fiona noticed Hamish notice it. The fire wouldn't take properly this morning. Hamish looked toward the grate. A few blackened sheets of paper sat beneath a collapsed twist of kindling. "You burn papers for kindling?" "Old drafts paper. Archivist habit." "Nah, I do know the difference." "Archive." "Aye." Her mouth tightened. "Tea, please." He followed her into the kit. There, beside a flower 3 apples, sat a wrapped bar of violet soap. Hamish looked at it. Fiona followed his eyes. "For heavens, Hamish, they still sell it." "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." She filled the kettle. "My mother liked violet soap. So did half the women of her, and Ruth's grandmother." Fiona set the kettle down rather harder than necessary. "I knew that conversation would come back. Most conversations do here." She turned. "Are you accusing my mother of sending those parcels?" "I'm asking." Fiona looked out through the kitchen window. Yes. The answer was so simple, almost missed its importance. Every Christmas. Most years. Why? Because she wished to. That's no much of it. It may be all you're entitled to." Hamish leaned against the dresser. "Marcus died because somebody thought he was entitled to too much." Fiona flinched. "Not dramatically. Just enough." The kettle began to murmur. After a moment, see the Bible. "So you want—" "Aye. I thought you would." She made tea first. That too seemed important somehow. And Nancy this shouting. Kennes, the family history. She carried the pot into the sitting room and then went upstairs. And then Hamish waited. His attention returned to the grate. One corner of a scorched sheet protruded beneath the kindling. He crouched. "Don't." Fiona stood in the doorway, holding the family Bible. Hamish straightened. "You were going to burn something." "I did burn something." "What?" "Some of Marcus Vale's notes." "That sounds. They were copies." "You're very certain." "I took them from the exhibition material before Blair sealed the remaining boxes." Hamish stared at her. Fiona's expression was exhausted rather than defiant. I know what you are going to say. Do you? That I have interfered with evidence. A popular village pastime this week. For the first time. And it died quickly. She brought the Bible to the table. It was large and dark, its leather binding cracked near the spine. Inside the cover, several names had been written in different hands. Panoff, Seveling Cesar over. And Fiona turned past marriages, deaths and births. There. The Menzies children were listed as here beneath the name of Fiona's Alexander Menzies. Get Jean, Robert, Margaret, Thomas. The entries were beautifully regular, except between Margaret and Thomas. There was too much space. Not half a page. Only enough to bother the eye once the eye knew to be bothered. Hamish put one finger beside the gap without touching the paper. What went here? Nothing. Somebody left room for nothing. People make mistakes. Your family does it. Fiona sat opposite him. My grandmother wrote those entries. She left space for another child. That is Sakane. Marcus's too. Fiona said nothing. Hamish opened the photocopy of Marcus's working chart he had brought with him. Marcus connected the altered parish entry, Morag Fraser, the later Menzies correction, Ruth's grandmother, being your mother, with the baby. And Snansing's, he connected things for a living. Aye, sometimes he was right. Fiona's fingers rested on the Bible cover. Hamish looked at them. You knew Ruth's grandmother was connected to your family before Marcus came. Yes. How? My mother told me. When? I was 23. Why then? Fiona's face softened to something Hamish had not seen before. Not grief exactly, the memory of grief. My grandfather had died. My mother found a packet of letters. From Morag Fraser. Yes. Hamish waited. She had worked in this young. My grandfather was not. Fiona's placed as if it were fragile. There was a child, a girl. My grandmother knew enough lost a baby, and agreed to foster her. Ah, Ruth's grandmother. Yes, Annie Kerr. That was the name she grew up with. Hamish looked again at the gap in the Bible. And your mother. She was a child herself when it happened. 11. She remembered the baby. The parcels. Yes. Why no name? Because my mother was a coward. The bluntness surprised. Fiona looked down. She loved Annie. In her way, she watched her grow up. She sent things. She spoke to her when they met. But she never stood in the middle of the village and said, "This is my sister." Did Annie know? Yes. That answer was quieter, and she knew who her father was. My mother told her when they were both adults, so nobody needed Marcus Vale to discover the scandal. No! Then why alter the parish record? Fiona went very still. There it was. Hamish had not raised his voice. He did not need to. Outside, a drop of water fell rhythmic from the gutter. Fiona said, "Can be wrong." Aye, they can also be incomplete. Aye, the original entry reduced her to Morag's child. Then she vanished into belonged anywhere else. And you changed it. Fiona looked at him. Years ago, to Menzies, to what she was. But you never changed the public family tree. Fiona's composure cracked, only a little. I couldn't. Hamish sat back. There was the contradiction Marcus had found. Fiona, keeper of record. Fiona, defender of documentary truth. Fiona, who had secretly altered a child remaining outside the family. Because. And Fiona, who had then built in booklets and family jars around a respectable Menzies line and in which that same child remained absent. You put her into the archive, said, and kept her out of the family. Fiona closed the Bible. I thought there would be a better time. For what? To explain. When? I don't know. That's the trouble. Ode. Appointments. That. She looked suddenly older. My mother begged me not to say anything while she was alive. And if my mother died, Ruth was a child. Then mother died. What good would it have done? Alfie, that's no for you to decide alone. I know that now. Hamish thought of Marcus Vale. Marcus. Well, yes. On television. He implied as much. And he knew you had altered the register. Yes. The word was barely audible. Hamish glanced toward the grate. What did you burn? Fiona did not answer. He crossed the room and crouched. This time she did not stop him. Using the poker, he burned sheet away from the ash. Most of it was black enough. Ah, a hand-drawn line, a fragment of a surname, and in Marcus' distinctive block capitals. Menzies line. Alfred? Hamish looked over his shoulder. Fiona's face had gone pale. You took this after Marcus died? Yes. Why? Because it was vile. That's no why. She stood. He had turned my mother into a hypocrite, my grandfather into the final reveal before an advert break. Nancy, still no why. Fiona pressed both hands against the back of a chair. I wanted it gone. And I was frightened. Hamish rose. Of Blair. Of everyone. That, at least, he believed. He slipped the scorched paper into an unused envelope from his pocket. Fiona watched him. Am I under arrest? No. Her eyes flickered. Should I be relieved? I wouldna rush into it. He picked up his cap. At the door, Fiona said, Hamish. He turned. I did not hate Ruth's grandmother. I know. My mother didn't either. I know that too. And what I changed in the record. But I was trying to put something right. Hamish regarded her for a long moment. That's often when folk do the most damage. Outside, the sunlight had strengthened. Sunsey had vanished from the wall. The thrush was back beneath the hedge. Working nothing of consequence had happened. Hamish walked slowly toward the kirk. Fiona now had motive to fear Marcus. She had lied by omission. She had tampered with evidence after his death, and she had spent years living inside a contradictions. But shame was not murder. Not yet. Hamish needed something that did not depend on what Fiona felt, or what Marcus intended. Error? Interpreting them. The register, the family tree, and the brass clip that had left its little green crescent wherever human hands had tried to hold the past in place. Chapter 8. The mark on the family tree. The kirk archive was brighter than Hamish had ever seen it. After 2 days of rain, afternoon sun, and struck the table at an angle, showing dust in the air and every scratch in the old varnish, the place looked less a nest. Gevers Gefye and said Hamish preferred it that way. Mysteries became harder to lie when ordinary things to l'ordinary. Macnab had brought back the photographs of the baptism register, Alec Brodie's torn cuff, and the brass page cleage. The clip itself sat inside the evidence bag. Blair had objected to Hamish examining anything without him. Macnab had responded. Elspeth sat on a chair near the wall with her notebook closed. You're not writing, Hamish asked. You told me I'd be thrown out if I did. Aye, said Niz. That is practically the same thing. You're still here. That, she said, is because you like an audience more than admit. Hamish gave her a look. She smiled and left the notebook shut. On the table lay Fiona's large exhibition family tree. It had been taken down from the vestry wall and placed beneath a clean sheet of transparent archival film. The Menzies line marched across it in disciplined black ink. Birth, marriage, death. No uncertainty, no question marks, no awkward branches wandering into other households. Hamish stood over it. Marcus Vale would have hated the neatness. Perhaps that was why he had looked at it so closely. Macnab came through the door, carrying 2 folders. Blair's looking for you. That's unfortunate. He says he wants everything ready for the supper tonight. He thinks he's arresting Alec there. Macnab nodded. Says it'll save chasing folk around. Very efficient. He's also invited himself to the supper. That's punishment enough for everyone. Elspeth looked at the family tree. So what are we looking for? A mark. Which mark? If I knew looking at it instead of talking. She folded her arms. You become charming when you concentrate. I'm told it's my worst quality. Hamish bent closer. The family tree sheet had been handled many times during the exhibition. Its corners were softened. A few fingerprints clouded the protective film. Near one edge were thin indentations from drawings. Just a faint indentation. Nothing useful. And he moved around the table and looked again, with the sunlight crossing it from the side. And then he saw the green. Barely more than a curved shadow near the lower left corner. He stopped. Macnab! Macnab came over. Hamish pointed. "See that?" Macnab leaned in. "A stain?" "Aye." Elspeth rose despite herself. Hamish glanced at her. "I'm only looking from there." She remained exactly worse than before. Macnab fetched the evidence photograph of Marcus's cuff. On the white shirt place where the brass clip had caught was the same faint green. He laid the photograph beside the family tree, not identical in size at first glance. But then Hamish remembered the nick. The brass clip did rest perfectly flat because one side had been damaged. The crescent-shaped bite meant fell unevenly. Macnab opened the evidence bag only enough to position the clip above the protective covering, without allowing it to touch Evia. The curve matched. Elspeth's expression changed. Used it on the family tree. Aye, that proves she handled the clip. Half the committee handled it. But this sheet proves the clip sat here. Hamish looked again. The mark alone was not enough. He could already hear Blair complaining that green stains were not murder. For once, Blair would have a point. Hamish lifted the clear film carefully. Light. Macnab switched on the portable examination lamp. They angled it across the paper. The paper changed under sideways illumination. Shallow lines appeared. Pressure marks. Not writing on the family tree itself. Writing transferred from something that had rested beneath it. Hamish bent lower. A horizontal ruled line. Then another. A fragment from Handerint. Macnab whispered, "Aye." Elspeth leaned forward. "You mean she had the original page underneath this while she worked?" "That's what it looks like." Hamish shifted the lamp. More impressions appeared. The shapes were faint, but one surname could be part. Fraz. Beneath it, a darker pressure line where someone had written over an existing entry. Hamish felt a quiet satisfaction, not triumph. Cases involving shame rarely deserve triumph. He straightened. Fiona removed the page before Marcus died. Macnab nodded slowly, used it while altering her display, or checking that her display met the version wanted. Elspeth of Souges said, "A photocopy or archival sheet, not the old brass one." And the real page. Hamish looked at the family tree. Hidden somewhere, Marcus found. Macnab rubbed his chin. So Marcus notices the substitution. He knew what the register looked like that morning. He'd commented on the... Hamish began walking through it aloud, slowly. During the exhibition, the genuine page is under the brass clip. Fiona takes it before the evening session. She puts as a modern in its place and uses a modern clamp, because she duns a less saying the Elspeth said, "Marcus had the real page, because seeing something and proving it are different." Hamish pointed to the... Marcus had the altered entry. He had the Bible, he had Ruth's photograph, what in the original paged itself to prove somebody had interfered with the record. So Fiona removed the proof. Aye, but Marcus spotted the switch. Aye, and confronted her. Hamish looked toward the short archive stair. The vestry seemed to rearrange itself in his mind. Marcus at the table. Fiona. The old page somewhere between them. Voices. Marcus reaching. Fiona pulling it away. The brass clip, perhaps still attached to another bundle, or picked up in the straw. Marcus's cuff tearing. The clip catching. Then the narrow stair. Hamish did not yet know whether Fiona... That distinction mattered. A fall during a struggle was not the same thing as a planned killing. But what happened afterward mattered too. The planted page in Alec's case had not placed itself there. Elspeth seemed to follow the same thought. If it was an accident, Hamish nodded. It may have begun as one, and then she framed Alec. Aye! That word carried more weight. Alec Brodie's convenient. His pride had made him believable. His return him almost perfect. Someone had known all three things. Someone who knew the village. Macnab said, "The cleaner her..." Aye. Fiona says she was at her aunt's before 9, which may still be partly true. Hamish looked at the wall clock. "We need the aunt's timing again." "I checked," Macnab. Mrs. Menzies remembered Fiona arriving after the weather forecast. Forecast television, 9:12. Hamish in the sound. Hamish turned. "She told us she left the kirk before 9. Macnab nodded. Power company log puts shortly before the electricity came back. Ah, sestesh. Isamim Elspeth said could still have... Aye, and reach her aunt by 9:12. Easy, 5 minutes by car in good weather. 7 or 8 that night. The contradiction was not enormous. That was why it worked. People rarely lied. By inventing entire evenings, they shaved minutes. Hamish looked once more at the family tree. The old self-secret sat as not killed. Marcus. Monks. What mattered was relationship. She had wanted Annie recognised. She had wanted the Menzies record corrected. She had also Stoersikson hidden. Marcus threatened to force those two to desires into the same room. When he did, Fiona had chosen which of herself the village would see. Macnab gathered the photographs. So we arrest her. Not yet. Blair will. That's why not yet. Elspeth looked at Smith. What are you planning? The genealogy supper. That isn't an answer. It's where everyone will be, including Fiona. Aye, and Alec. Aye, and Blair. Apparently, Hamish sighed. Aye. Elspeth studied him. You're going to do this public. I would rather not. But Fiona built the lie publicly. Ruth was shamed publicly. He paused. So some things will need put right where folk can hear. Elspeth's expression softened. Carefully. Hamish looked at her. Aye. She opened her notebook. He pointed at it. No, I haven't written anything. You opened it. It was this. Hamish shook his head. As they left, sunlight still lay across the family tree. Near the bottom corner was almost invisible again. A tiny mark, the sort of thing most people would wipe away without thinking, did not always leave them. Non-stop. And somebody in Lochdubh had spent the right places if the right names would. Years believing nobody'd notice the pressure underneath. Chapter 9. Supper. The closing supper had the genealogy. Weekend. By 6:30, cheerfulness was being attempted with. The kirk meeting room had been rearranged with long tables, bowls of soup, baskets still covered the walls, though several had been for publid and ancestries during the afternoon, after Marcus Vale's and Fall's performance, after Marcy Hames slecked him, then Hamley Trees, Daphne Ances, C. came and said, Mrs. Wellington's remained. She had added a second card beneath the family Bible, family ownership, traditionally dated, earlier than... Hamish thought Marcus might almost have admired the wording. Alec Brodie sat at one table. He had been released from Strathbane, 2 hours apologised, but freedom had not improved his mood. Alec had therefore prepared enough resentment for both of them when Hamish allowed near the cutlery. I assume I am... So far. Has Blair checked the spoons? Give him time. Alec's mouth twitched. It was the first sign, saying... Hemans? Ruth arrived from the hotel carrying 2 baskets of bread, but returned to her shift that afternoon. The August head would be permitted to ask about her grant. I'm off to the Mother of the Mannon to ask about her grandmother. Nancy, the assurance lasted 11 minutes. Ruth had handled the next question herself. Hamish had heard that a visiting genealogist from Perth asked whether she notes to herself, part of the Menzies lines. Ruth had replied, part of the staff, and your soup is getting cold. The story had already improved in circulation. Fiona came last. Conversation thinned when she entered. She wore the same dark green cardigan from the opening morning, and carried a stack of exhibition programmes against her chest. For a moment Hamish saw how tired she was. Then she straightened. If everyone would sit, she said. We ought to be... Nobody had officially removed her as organiser. Nobody quite knew how. So Fiona continued to organise. That was Lochdubh too, the minister said in grace. Bowls were passed. Bread was torn. Blair arrived during the first one. He came through the door with Macnab behind and the expression of a man who believed his entrance had improved the evening. And several people disagreed. Mrs. Wellington looked at the empty place beside her and moved her handbag onto it. Blair noticed. He chose another chair. I'll not be staying long, he announced. Promises, Alec muttered. Blair glared at him. You're lucky you're out of slap. Alec stood halfway from... Hamish said, Sit down, Alec. I have sat down while that man accused me of murder, and standing will improve his manners. Alec considered Blair. No! He sat. Fiona rose near the display board. I had hoped, she began, that despite everything which has happened, we might end the weekend by remembering why it was organised. The exhibition was intended to encourage people to preserve family records. The archive belongs to the community. Attics siwys in the ruckus of the separate. Her voice was steady. We have lost a guest in Terrellvale. I believe the work should circumstances. Whatever one thought, there was a murmur. Not agreement exactly, but willingness. Hamish felt a brief unexplained sadness in Fiona was good at this. Useful people could do terrible things without ceasing to be useful. That was part of what made them difficult to lose. Blair pushed back his chair. Before anybody gets sentimental, there's police business. Fiona's fingers tightened around the programmes. Blair looked toward Alec. Hamish stood. No! Blair turned. What? You're no arresting Alec. The room went very quiet. Blair's face darkened. This is an active murder inquiry, Macbeth. Aye, that's why it would be useful to arrest the right person. Alec stared at Hamish. Blair said, We found the missing page in his case. No, you found a page. It was the missing page. It was planted there. A stup, and set toward Jessie. Nessie, Jessie whispered, Listen first. Nessie nodded solemnly. Blair said, And you've proof of this? Aye. Hamish walked to the tickler folder on it, and placed. Inside was the evidence photograph of the page found in Alec's case. The genuine baptism page had been held open for most of Saturday, uses in the archive. Fiona did not move. Hamish continued. Yea, the brass leaves verdigris when it's damp. A wee green mark. We saw it on the tissue. He held up the photograph. But there's no such mark on the page found Alec's case. This is a rectangular pressure mark from a modern archival clamp. Blair said, About Brodie. It proved earlier than Marcus's death, and substituted before the evening confrontation. Alec looked slowly toward Fiona. Hamish did not. Not yet. The person who planted it needed Alec to look guilty. That was easy enough. He'd quarrelled with Marcus in front of half the hours, and everybody knew he believed Marcus had stolen his research. Alec said bitterly, Convenient! Hamish looked around the room. That was why it worked. Blair crossed his arms. So who planted it? Hamish turned toward Fiona. She had gone very pale. Ruth stopped with one hand around her spoon. Hamish said gently, Fiona, nobody moved. The rain was gone, but water still dripped to somewhere outside the window, slow and regular. Fiona placed the programmes on the table. You should be careful, Hamish. I have been. That would be a recent development. A few people looked down. Even then she could manage dryness. Hamish wished she had made it easier. She did not. He took the Menzies family tree from the display stand and laid it flat. At the lower corner, there's a green crescent. Blair stepped closer. So! Same crescent on Marcus Vale's cuff. Says, caught a struggle. A murmur went through the room. Hamish spoke over it. The clip has a nick along one side. It leaves Dave's a curved one. Fiona said, I handled that clip. Aye. So did half the committee. Aye. Then your mark proves nothing. By itself, no. Hamish lifted the edge of the protective film covering her family tree. But this does. He angled the paper beneath the nearby lamp. Shallow impressions appeared across the sheet. Ruled lines, fragments of handwriting, the ghost of another document. Hamish pointed. The real baptism page was lying underneath this family tree while you copied from it. Fiona stared at the marks for the first time. Not because the accusation was wrong, because paper had remembered, Hamish went on. You removed the genuine leaf before Saturday evening. You replaced it with another sheet held under plastic clamp. Marcus has noticed. Blair said sharply, How? Because he'd studied the register earlier. He knew. MacNab stepped forward. The cleaner heard Marcus arguing with a woman just before the power came back at 8:54. Hamish nodded. Fiona told us she had left before 9 to visit her aunt. But her aunt Fiona arriving after the television weather forced ended at 9:12. Fiona said, Enough. She looked toward him. The room seemed to contract around them. Hamish's voice remained mild. You went back into the vestry after telling us you were leaving. Marcus had discovered the substitution. He wanted... No. Fiona's answer was quiet. No! He wanted a scene. Hamish waited. Fiona looked at the family tree. He said he would show the altered entry on camera. Then the Bible. Then Ruth's photograph. Ruth's face tightened, continued, almost as if she had forgotten the rest of the room. Nancy. He kept saying it was perfect. Perfect. Marcus's producer looked down at the table. Fiona laughed once, without humour. A hidden daughter who had altered the record herself. He said people loved hypocrisy and self. After Hamish said dies, I asked him to stop, and he laughed. No one interrupted. He said the programme would air whether I cooperated or not. He wanted the original leaf for the close-up. Fiona folded her arms around herself. I had it in the archive room. Hamish glanced toward the narrow stair beyond the vestry wall. You went to get it. He followed me, and the brass clip... Fiona closed her eyes. It was attached to the papers I had carried upstairs. He grabbed them. Marcus's cuff tore. Yes. The clip caught. Yes. Blair said... Fiona's eyes opened. No. Blair stepped. You expect us to believe. Hamish's voice sharpened. Let her speak. Blair turned on him. I'm conducting. No, you're interrupting. There was a faint sibilance in Hamish's voice now. Blair stopped. Hamish looked back at Fiona. What happened? He pulled the page off. Her hands began. He was standing at the top of the steps. Ruth whispered, Oh! Fiona swallowed. He lost his footing. Nobody spoke. I heard him fall. Her voice became small. I went down. Hamish said, He was dead! Yes. And then... Fiona looked toward Alec. For the first time seemed to leave him. Kate only hurt remained. Fiona said, You took the real page. Yes. And planted the earlier leaf in Alec's case. Yes. Alec closed his eyes. Fiona looked at him. I knew you had come back. So you chose me. I knew they would believe. Alec gave a strange little nod. That is almost worse. Fiona looked away. Blair said... Hamish did not answer him. Labels could wait. The moral fact was already plain enough. Fiona turned toward Ruth. Her face crumpled then. I wanted Annie put back. Ruth said nothing. I thought that was what I was doing when I changed the record, giving her the name she should have had. But you never told anyone. Fiona looked at him. My mother begged me not to. And later, I was ashamed. Of Annie? No! The force of it startled them. Fiona's eyes filled. Of us. She looked toward Menzies' Bible. My grandfather, make up for silence, me doing exactly the same. Nay says the same thing. Did my gran hate you? Fiona turned. What? Did she hate the Menzies family? Fiona stared at her. I don't know. Ruth nodded slowly. All right. That was all. No forgiveness. No condemnation. Only an answer. Honestest. Fiona's mouth trembled. I wanted to give her proper family. Hamish looked at the foundry on the table, then at Ruth, then back at Fiona. You canna give somebody their name by deciding parts of their life other folk are allowed to know. Fiona lowered her head. MacNab moved quietly toward. Blair opened his mouth. Hamish gave him a look. For once Blair kept whatever he had been about to say. Fiona took her coat from the back of the chair. She did not struggle when MacNab asked her. At the door she stopped beside Ruth. No one in the room pretended not to watch. Fiona said, I'm sorry. Ruth's face was unreadable. I know. It was not absolution. Perhaps Fiona understood that. She nodded once and left. The door closed. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Mrs. McLean went to the soup pot. It will be, she said. It was such and so to tears. See a stuff! She began ladling soup into fresh bowl. Mrs. Wellington passed bread. Alec remained sitting alone and moved to the empty chair beside him. He looked startled. "You don't have to do that. I know." Across said to Hamish, "I'd have got there." Hamish looked at him. "Aye." Blair frowns of a... "When?" Hamish asked. Blair did not answer. Elspeth stood near the back wall, her notebook still closed. Hamish caught her eye. She gave him the smallest nod. The family trees remained hanging around them. Straight lines, neat dates, respectable Thames. Hamish looked at them differently now. Perhaps everyone did. By the time pudding arrived, another one. But nobody seemed quite as certain that the lines told the whole story either. Chapter 10. The blank The kirk looked larger once everybody's ancestors had gone home. By 10 the following morning, most of the exhibition boards had been stripped bare. Photographs were being returned to envelopes. Come cautiously, and family bath, where they would resume collecting toward cottages, where they would resume collecting dust with dignity. Atka already been locked in their cabinet. The old brass page clip had not. MacNab had placed it in a small evidence box on the vestry table, where it looked. Hamish stood looking while Mrs. Maclean into a crate. "All that trouble," she said, following his gaze, "because nobody wanted to buy a new one." "Oh, it did its job, keeping pages open." "Aye," Mrs. Maclean considered that. Not quite the job Fiona intended. No. She wrapped cup in a newspaper. There were some observations, Hamish thought, which did not. So Alec Brodie arrived carrying his document case. He paused in the doorway. "I have checked it myself this morning for murder evidence. For anything placed, find much. A receipt from 2017, which does not belong to me." Hamish nodded gravely. Strathbane should be informed and decide to enjoy it. That came. "I suppose Blair has apologised." "No, I knew he wouldn't. He did say there had been an evidential development. That man could trip over the truth and call it operational progress." Alec began sorting his own more than he intended to pleased. To show, Alec lifted one folder. "For the record, I was right about the Menzies line. Aye, and Marcus Vale had used parts of my transcription. Aye, without Alec! What? A man's dead, has been turned inside out, and you're still after a footnote." Alec looked offended, then thoughtful. After a moment, he said. Hamish laughed. Across the room, Ruth, carrying an empty cardboard box. Conversation paused for half a beat. Not long. Long enough. Then Mrs. Maclean said, "There you are! Take the photographs from this table, would you?" Ruth looked grateful. "I can do that." Nobody asked her about Annie Kerr. That represented progress of an unusually strenuous kind. Mrs. Wellington entered 5 minutes later and approached Ruth with the cautious determination of someone diplomacy in unfamiliar territory. "My dear." Ruth turned. Mrs. Wellington adjusted the strap of her handbag. "I wanted to say that I've repeated 1 or 2 things yesterday, which, in retrospect, were perhaps not entirely my—" "That sounds likely." Mrs. Wellington blinked. Then, unexpectedly, "Yes, well, quite." She moved away. Alec leaned toward Ruth. "That was an apology. I recognise the general It is rare in the wild." Ruth laughed. The sound loosened something in the room. Hamish went outside. Sun lay weakly in the higher slopes. Water dripped from the eaves, but the air had that clean sharpness which came after several days of rain, when even Isharabish appeared briefly refreshed. Elspeth was waiting by the kirk wall. "You're becoming a habit," Hamish said. I could say the same. She held a folded newspaper proof in one hand. "Your article, the beginning of it. You're showing me." "No. Then why bring it?" "So you'd ask." Hamish sighed. "You're exhausting. I remember you saying something almost affectionate once. You misheard." She handed him the proof. The headline was not about Marcus Vale. It was not about Fiona either. It read, "The name left out." Hamish read the first paragraph. Elspeth had begun with the altered baptism record and the woman who had grown up under other surname, for two families quietly shared knowledge of who she was. You two, no scandalous language, no secret, no television cleverness. She had not named Ruth. Hamish read a little further. You've left a lot out. Yes, journalists can do that. Advanced technique. He handed it back. It's not bad. Elspeth stared at him. Not bad? Aye. I spend half the writing something you approve of and get not bad. You shouldna let praise spoil you. She folded the proof slowly. You know, Hamish, one day your emotional generosity will overwhelm somebody. I hope I'm no there when it happens. She smiled, but there was a softness in it, which made him look away toward the lock. After a moment she said, I'm leaving this up. Aye, you knew. I suspected I could miss the train. That would be careless. You might ask me to. Hamish studied a gull with unnecessary concentration. Elspeth waited, then laughed quietly. Still a coward. I'm cautious. No, you're very brave when somebody else is in danger. That one landed too near the bone. She touched his arm once. Goodbye, Hamish. Goodbye, Elspeth. She walked down toward the hotel. He did not call her back. He was not entirely proud of that. Neither was he surprised. At near midday, Ruth found in the vestry she was standing beside the Menzies family tree. Fiona's original exhibition sheet, but Alec had made a replacement for the Kirk archive. Stuff! Most of it followed the documentary record. One section did not. Beside Alexander Menzies' name, a short branch, Annie Kerr, born as Morag Fraser, 1948, parentage recorded incompletely. Beyond that, the line there was blank paper beneath it. Hamish looked at Alec. You left it unfinished. Deliberately. That must have hurt. Accuracy is not the same as certainty to me. High praise from Alec Brodie. Ruth touched the edge of the sheet. People keep asking what I'm going to call myself now. What do you tell them? Hamish asked. Ruth. A sensible compromise. She smiled. Do you think Gran would have wanted her name changed? Hamish considered the question. I never met her. The Hasses stopped to Sutton. Having Nancy. Aye, that's reason enough for me no too. Ruth looked again at the empty branch. I think I'll leave it like that for a while. Alec will suffer. I shall be brave. From the meeting room came Mrs. Wellington's voice. Who has taken my Bible? Alec called back. You are standing beside... Oh. Ruth's smile widened. Ordinary life. Thought. Did Nancy's... Gant interrupting. Ah, Blair arrived shortly before lunch. He did not come to apologise. Explain the investigation to Hamish. He asked his yacht... Standing in the Kirk doorway. Was pressure. Aye. I kept pressure on Brodie that forced the real culprit to make mistakes. Hamish looked at him. What mistakes did Fiona make after you arrested Alec? Blair frowned. That's not the point. No! No, investigations have momentum. They certainly do when you're rolling downhill. Blair's eyes narrowed. You'll be writing your report properly. Aye. And no mention of this nonsense about my arresting the wrong man. You did arrest the wrong man. I detained a suspect. You told half Strathbane you'd solve. That is not an official phrase. Hamish smiled. Blair glanced toward the evidence box. Kit. That wee bit of metal was useful, I'll give you that. Aye. Forensic stationery. Hamish stared at him. Blair seemed pleased with the phrase. I might put that in the report. Please do. Blair gathered his folder and went out. Hamish watched him leave. Some battles lost deliberately. Nasty. That evening the Kirk was locked. The exhibitionist posters came down from Patel's shop and the hotel window. The television van and gone before carrying Marcus equipment without him. Sat at the police, the kettle on. Lugs settled close enough to receive the warmth. Without appearing grateful for it, Hamish sat with boots stretched toward the fire. He thought of Fiona. Of her mother posting violet soap every Christmas without signing her name. Of Annie Kerr those parcels. Of Marcus who could see the lie in a family tree, the person underneath it. And of Ruth who had been offered a new name, had chosen to keep the one she already possessed. Outside filled the across slipping between-yard wall, Sunsey appeared briefly in the old stones. Some names there could still be read. Others had softened into almost nothing. Families had gone on regardless. Hamish poured his tea. Tomorrow Lochdubh would find something newer to discuss. It nearly always did. And in the kirk archive, and then nearly rewritten empty space. Alec Brodie had left a little settlements neatly, not because the truth did not matter, because sometimes telling the truth, ta'en end. Lochdubh did not give up genealogy after Marcus confidence with a little Vale's death. But for a while people drew their families themselves rarely oblige. The old brass clip had been meant only to fragile poge open, yet faint green market left a reminder that the past cannot be held in one preferred position without our own hands, leaving some tray, and shan trace upon. There was never shame in Annie Kerr's complicated beginning. The harm came from being offered privately while truth remained hidden publicly. Truth, miss. And then, by evening, the regents announced their cupboard. The kettle was boiling again, and Lochdubh had begun returning to itself. Some things had been correct. Others were sound with room be understood later. If you discovered that a beloved family story was wrong, would you change the story, or keep telling the version that had held everyone together? And said, thank you for spending this rainy genealogy weekend in Lochdubh. Sometimes the smallest object keeps the clearest record of what people hope to hide, and Hamish followed the green mark an old brass clip could not help leaving behind. Until our next mystery in the Highlands,